Presentation. And now we would like to welcome our friend Patrick LaForge from PR LaForge Management to officially welcome DM Larry Kaumeyer.
Thanks. Before I get started, I just have one question. How about those Blue Jays? Hey, right in the United States and coming home with the big prize. I love it. Larry, sorry, Larry. There you go. Larry Kaumeyer is the Deputy Minister of Energy and Minerals. He was appointed in June 2023. Larry has spent 25 years dedicated to the advancement of our province by working in finance, energy, technology, strategic leadership for local business and governance. Larry has worked for the Alberta government on corporate and economic matters, has also served as the Chief Executive Officer for 4 different organizations over his career. These include a broad range of industries such as manufacturing to energy supply chain, pipeline inspection, earth moving, and reclamation. Most recently, as Acting Chief of Staff and Principal Secretary to our Premier, Larry led the strategic execution of key economic files. Larry has a Bachelor of Arts. I don't know how he converted that all into business, but well done, from the University of Alberta. Come on up, Larry.
Well, thanks. Thank you, Pat. It's truly a pleasure to be here. I thought, first, I'm just totally stoked about the Blue Jays. I mean, how could we not be any prouder of a team that has excelled in that way? I mean, truly excelled. It's remarkable to see how they continue to have the adversity to come back time and time again. I mean, there's some great lessons there for all of us that I think we should be extremely proud of. Well, thank you. I'm going to start with some opening comments, and then I think Cam and I are going to have a bit of a Q&A fireside chat, so I'm looking forward to that. We certainly live in interesting times. I'm going to take you through a little bit of context relative to energy. As you can imagine, I pretty much live and breathe in regards to what's happening with energy, and I would say off the top that I'm extremely proud to be working with a minister by the name of Brian Jean. Brian is truly a passionate leader for our energy in this province, from Fort McMurray, of course, but he's also a tremendous leader, and I've learned a lot from Brian, and we work very harmoniously together, and he is totally endorses my ability to come out and do these kinds of things with people in the public, and so I thank him, and obviously I thank the Premier for putting me in the role. So I'll take a few minutes to sort of set the stage and then look forward to the chat. I first want to just talk a little bit about population and energy realities. Of the 8.2 billion people on the planet today, 700 million have no electricity. 1.2 billion live in energy poverty, and 2.2 billion people rely daily on polluted fuels, firewood, kerosene, and dung to cook their food on a daily basis. More than 4 billion people globally lack the basic energy needed to prosper, and 3.2 million people die annually from indoor pollution from the inhalation of smoke, fumes, and just trying to cook their daily food. That's 8% of Canada's population dying every year. Basic per capita energy consumption is approximately 50 MBTU a day of consumption, or I should say per year of consumption. Developing countries use 3 times that amount, likely closer to 160 MBTU. So in other words, if you think about the people in the world that are among the few that are fortunate enough to have that amount of energy, that's what they're using. Canadians use 400 MBTU a year. In other words, we are almost 2.5 times the global average of those who actually live not in energy poverty, because we live in a cold climate. We are among the very few countries in the world that have an abundant energy source, and in some respects, I think we take it for granted. Global energy demand will accelerate going forward until primary democratic population falls and global population peaks around 2050, 2060. And so we see this going forward in regards to the birth rates, obviously in China, the birth rates in Japan. We see what's going on in Japan. We see the countries where that global population is starting to change, obviously. Until then, both mature economies and developing countries will require significant amounts of new energy for different reasons. For the 1 billion of us that do not live in energy poverty, demand will grow due to electricity and data centers, along with general energy growth from immigration and market access. And we're seeing that certainly in this province. In developing countries, energy demand will grow by at least 25% to support them just basically coming into a higher level of overall sustainable standard of living. Undermining these fundamentals is a need to produce energy that is lower in emissions. However, this will be far more difficult due to the realities of affordability, sustainability, or reliability, and growing consumption. We have to continue to lower emissions, but it can't be at the cost of affordability, reliability, and growth in our energy consumption. And this is the new reality that we're all having to address on a global basis. It came as a result of the incursion in Ukraine, in regards to many European countries, obviously seeing very clearly what happened to their energy grid. And Germany being really the primary example of what's going on when you start to change your energy mix and there's a shock to the system, you get unintended consequences. Some of those unintended consequences were people actually burning coal in their apartments 3 years ago because they had no other option. Affordability and commercial and consumer acceptance will drive the pace of energy additions. So keep this in mind relative to our affordability. Biodiesel today is 150% more expensive than traditional diesel. Think about the cost of your fruit and vegetables being trucked across Canada and that costing you 3 times more than what it does today. Sustainable aviation fuel is certainly something we should try to aspire to, but it is 3 times more expensive than traditional jet fuel. So when you decide to go on your trip, would you pay 3 times your price relative to your airline ticket to get down to Mexico? Can we afford that? It is estimated that even a 10 to 20% blend of clean hydrogen, something we're actually quite interested in doing as a government, would increase your bill by 10 to 15%. And we may be all right with that, but think about everyone that's living paycheck to paycheck and their ability to actually take that on. An assessment of green hydrogen projects has the capital cost per kilowatt hour coming in at about $2,350 per kilowatt, or more than 6 times what hydrogen advocates had anticipated. Over the past 2 years, 30% of green hydrogen projects have been canceled, more than 30% delayed, and 10 to 15% continue but are not completed. Canada is certainly in a situation where we can be an energy superpower, and I think it's extremely important that we understand our ability to do that. All forms of energy will be needed to grow. The world today consumes more oil, more gas, coal, and wood than ever before. And yes, next year, the world will burn more coal, for example, than it did last year, especially in China and developing countries. More than 200 plants in the US burn coal today. This is not a transition of energy, folks. This is a broad addition and sustainability of energy that is evolving. We need all forms, and we need to understand how that mix can operate as we go forward relative to both climate change and the reality of affordability. The nuclear renaissance is beginning, but it will not truly reach scale and broader acceptance until the mid to late 2030s, as an emerging technology can be safely produced, enriched, and transported. And there's tremendous work going on at Darlington in Ontario right now. They're advancing with their SMR program, and we see that as being sort of the leading edge. And Canada can lead that, and we are going to lead that. But the regulatory constructs around that are taking a considerable amount of time. Renewables are expected to grow significantly and will be a vital source of clean energy production, both globally and in Canada. Renewables and electricity demand will not be able to provide the energy density required for many of us in our industrial and commercial interests. We have more renewables in this province than most other provinces combined. All right, we really very much are interested in growing our renewable portfolio, but it's got to be reliable, and it's got to be something that actually supports our ability to operate the grid. And we have had some fragility in our grid by trying to bring on too many renewables too quickly, and you've all seen it. So we have to almost have 1 kilowatt backup for renewables, almost needs to have 1 kilowatt backup for gas, right? That's just kind of how we roll, because there are times, and we had one last December and 2 Decembers ago, where the wind didn't blow and the sun didn't shine, and the next thing you know, we've got a problem because we're too reliant on it. So we need to be very careful on that. What does Canada have to offer, and what has been our history and strengths in supporting the global demand for energy? Canada is an energy powerhouse today, and we can become, in Prime Minister Carney's words, a superpower tomorrow with clear understanding of playing to the strengths of our country. We shouldn't be apologizing for the fact that we are a global leader in oil and gas. Canada should recalibrate our Paris commitment, and I think it's going to have to. I think we are at a stage where, and to quote Bill Gates this week, I think Bill probably got it pretty right, which was, look, we're going to have to look at broader constructs of affordability, and we may need to tweak how we get there relative to the Paris commitment. We're almost at 1.5 now, and we're exceeding that probably. So we're going to have to look at how we manage that, right? It's going to require an additional conversation. We will need to fix our carbon markets to make them more fungible. We should allow for enhanced oil recovery as part of carbon capture and part of the investment track structure. And we've had some very good discussions with Ottawa recently in regards to enhanced oil recovery and their acceptance of that. That is a long way from where we were 24 months ago, folks, right? The fact that we have a prime minister who is now standing up in Asia right now promoting natural gas and oil is a very different situation than what we had previously. So we are very encouraged by that. As you know, we hold the 4th largest oil reserves in the world, and we are now number 9 in the world in gas. We just completed with McDaniels our reserve study, and our recoverable reserves in oil are approximately 165 billion barrels of oil, which has a value of $10 trillion. Think about that. $10 trillion. For those of you in the industry who actually end up having to pay royalties, you'll be happy to know that that actually constitutes about $1.8 trillion in additional tax and royalties that would go to the governments. So why do we need that? Well, let's look at the pressure on schools. Let's look at the pressure on our hospitals. Let's look at what's gone on in regards to immigration in this province, right? We've added a city of Red Deer, the size of Red Deer in this province the last 3 years. We need that money. We're going to have that, and the only way to get it is to have a strong economy, a vibrant economy, and an expanding and growing economy. Our gas, we now have 1.36 quadrillion cubic feet of gas. Yeah, that's right. 144 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves here in Alberta with a value of almost $1 trillion at today's depressed prices, I might add. Alberta is is also known for its lithium. We estimate the amount of lithium in the province to be between 40 and 45 million tons of lithium. That puts us in the top 5 in the world, by the way. As we all know, Canadians have countless reserves of uranium. We have countless reserves of uranium. There was a great deal yesterday by Cameco, if you didn't read that, relative to them doing a deal on their uranium with Brookfield. We actually are a world leader in uranium, and we can do that. There's also uranium reserves in Alberta, and the Premier reminds me quite often that I need to figure out a drilling program by which we can start to extract that. Alberta has a distinct advantage in the heavy oil to be used as its primary feedstock for refining, which sees increased demand in Asia, India, and the US for the foreseeable future. Today, Canada produces about 10 to 12 BCF of gas a day that goes to the United States. Today, we export 4.2 million barrels of oil a day to the United States. We also export another approximately 900,000 barrels a day, obviously through TMX 1 and 2, or Trans Mountain 1 and 2 as I refer to it. Combined, the total oil exports equate to about 5.3 million barrels a day. And here's the kicker. The export value of our oil is larger than autos, agriculture, forestry, and steel combined to the Canadian economy. Right? Gas will be the primary feedstock for data centers and grid expansion. And we cannot hamper our gas opportunity with regulations that add costs, uncertainty, and make us uncompetitive in a North American market. We need to understand that the Energy Dominance Committee that President Trump has struck is approving a gas pipeline in 14 days. All right? That's what we're up against. That Energy Dominance Committee, which is chaired by Secretary Burgum and Secretary Wright, are making decisions to advance their grid in hours, not even weeks. That's what we're talking about. And so when we talk about a competitive landscape for capital and investment, it shouldn't be a surprise to us that in the last 120 days, we've had between 11 and $18 billion of capital invested by Canadian companies in the United States and not here. All right? Lots of names. It's public. Capital Power, TransCanada, Enbridge. And I'm not taking a shot at you guys at Enbridge over there. The reality of it is that that's where the better returns are. That's where it's easier to do business. And frankly, I have to own that because we've got to fix that. TMX oil has two destinations, China and the US West Coast. China is taking a larger and larger share of TMX oil every month. And so it's probably not a surprise that the Prime Minister is meeting with the Chinese president today. My sense is that conversation hopefully would include the fact that we could maybe provide them with a little more oil. They're buying it anyway. They're buying most of what comes off TMX today. And maybe we actually are creative enough to say, let's deal with canola and pork. Let's deal with that. We'll provide you with more oil. Let's get rid of the tariffs on canola and pork. These kinds of conversations have to be had. All South Korean refiners are now asking for oil, and all South Korean refineries are now taking Canadian heavy oil. That's a first. As you know, LNG Canada has begun to ship gas to Asia, and last month's trade surplus saw a lift from LNG Canada right in the numbers. In other words, one project, folks, moved our GDP, and our numbers demonstrated that in 1 month. What Canada needs to do to be an energy superpower, we need to act like an energy superpower inside Canada and recognize our immense strengths and play to our advantages. Yes, that includes emerging energy forms, but to pay for these emerging forms and to pay for what we need to in society, we need to export more oil and gas, period. Nothing has the value globally as our oil and gas reserves do. Nothing, right? It is the currency. It is the commodity currency in the world today is oil and gas, and it will be for some time to go. Use the revenues to pay for carbon capture. Use the revenues from that are could create and continue to build great jobs in this province, and use those to support our ability to reduce emissions. Public policy does not drive an economy. Economy drives on market principles, and we need to remember that. We have generational revenue opportunities now if we can reform our regulations and eliminate the policies that are standing in the way. And I think you're all very familiar with where the Premier stands on her 9 bad laws. The Canadian energy security, Canadian sovereignty, and Canadian prosperity will all benefit if we recognize we can be the last best barrel and the last best molecule of gas globally. That should be our destination. We have to drop the proposed emissions cap. We have to also deal with the tanker ban if we're going to get our resources to the world. We have to streamline our policies, and we need to act like we are a global superpower. A Made in Canada pipeline to the West Coast is essential to scale Canada's much needed export diversification strategy. We can continue to send our oil to the United States. Frankly, it's easier, but that's not really going to help your relationship long term. If we are true about diversifying our markets in the same way that you would want to diversify your markets as a business leader, having 80% of your actual revenues tied up with one client, that's a problem. And we need to recognize that as a country. We need to diversify and have more oil going off the West Coast. Quite frankly, it has a direct impact on our differential by about $2 to $4. And that also gives us the flexibility of basically saying we can open up to new markets. It's nothing different than what you'd want to do in your own business, really. No pipeline company can proceed without the 2019 oil tanker ban moratorium being in place. People say, well, why did we become the proponent? Because there is no choice. You can't take an Enbridge, you can't take a South Bow, you can't take a pipeline company and say, look, you know, even though we've got this issue on the side of a tanker ban, we still want you to commit a whole bunch of resources, time, energy, and effort to actually standing up an application for a pipeline, right? Why would they do it? I wouldn't do it. Would you as a business leader do that? Go to your board of directors and commit, look, I want to commit $1 billion, but there's no way I can guarantee you that we're actually going to be able to move the resource. Of course you wouldn't, which is why we had to step in and actually become the proponent for the pipeline, right? Not something we want to do, but something we have to do. And we have to do it because of policy that's in the way of our ability to act like a global superpower. Time is of the essence. We must move faster, and we must not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This must include an emission strategy and Indigenous participation, I might add. However, we cannot get to these crucial pieces if capital markets do not see a viable, certain, and predictable path to spending the hundreds of millions to design a pipeline. No CEO would take the risk, as I've said, and we're making sure that we take those first steps with the project management office to ensure that we can get a Class 5 application stood up and approved by next May, which is what we've committed to doing, so that that pipeline can proceed. Capital investment, folks, is like water. It flows and moves to where it wants to go. Today, the capital is flowing to the US, and there are plenty of examples of Canadian-based companies, as I said, making investment announcements in the United States. Bill C-5 from the federal government is a tremendously good first step. And we are seeing a change there, and it is certainly something that we are seeing that we can really have conversations on a different level with the federal government, and it's working. But it's not enough yet to get the capital coming back to Canada. We can't just say we're going to bring the capital back. We need to bring it back threefold, right? This is about we're in a hole on capital, and we need to recognize that. And it's got to come back 2 or 3 times more than we expect if we're going to really get this economy moving. We're also going to need people for that. And I was pleased, Jack, to hear about Norquest, some of the things that you're doing. And I know that there's Nate's here and others. The trade sector, I can't stress enough how critical that's going to be for us going forward. So in conclusion, I just say that, yes, we must build out our energy and emerging energy resources and our renewables for the grid expansion, for electricity. But we cannot, folks, leave trillions of dollars of wealth in the ground with our oil and gas assets. And we are already global leaders in methane and emissions reductions. The oil sands have grown production by more than 1 million barrels a day since 2016, and emissions have basically stayed constant. In other words, we need to move from the actual total absolute emission to emissions intensity. And we need to compete on that relative to a global barrel on intensity and ensure that we bring that intensity down over time in order to do that. Our kids need this resource out of the ground. So with growing national security requirements, we must have sources of GDP that add jobs, produce wealth, taxes, and royalties to support a broader economic expansion and fabric across the country. Let's get going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. I appreciate that. Now we're going to invite Cam Milliken with Genix, who's our industry partner and longtime friend. Glad that you're here. Thanks, Cam. I should also mention that questions that were submitted in advance have been slightly adjusted to be more operational focused for Mr. Kaumeyer. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Deputy Minister.
Test.
I think you touched on many things, some that will arise in our questions, but maybe we can hone in a little bit more and zero in just a tad more. I recognize today we're a very educated audience here, but I think for the sake of it, what does a deputy minister do? I think again we're an educated audience, but you're not elected.
No.
And if the minister,
Thank goodness.
I was going to say, if the minister goes, you still get to stick around for a little bit, maybe.
That's right.
Maybe.
Yeah. So so basically, essentially, Cam, that from a deputy's perspective in energy and minerals, I get a mandate letter. That mandate letter gets drafted by the Premier. And many of you have probably seen our mandate letters. They're public. And I execute the policy to ensure that we live up to the principles of what that mandate letter asks us to do. From an actual department perspective, we have 400 to 500 people that basically work on every aspect of policy from beginning to end. And, that might sound like a lot, but, we have so much policy work going on right now, both from the perspective of getting rid of policies that are getting in the way. How do we streamline our permitting processes, for example, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But from a department perspective, our role is to execute the policy so that we can ensure that industry can be successful. And that's really what we have to focus on. Back in the day when I started in 1993 as chief of staff for Jim Dinning, our role in government was very clear from the Klein Revolution at that point with Ralph, which was to get out of the way of business. Let business be successful. Don't make policies that are getting in the way. The world's kind of evolved now where policy is so much part of our day-to-day life relative to governments. It's kind of, so we've got to continue, and I think to push that to where our policies are simple, streamlined, and can let investment occur.
Right. That's good.
Yeah.
So basically you do all the work for the minister.
Well, we do a lot of the work. But yeah.
I know enough ministers to say that. Appreciate that. Let's get right into it if we can. A lot of these are questions that you've submitted and that others have submitted. Some you have touched on, but maybe we can dig a little deeper here. Alberta seeks to really defend its energy and mineral interests globally and ensure that there's competitive access. From a public service point of view, what are the greatest external threats and opportunities, global supply chain, critical minerals, export markets, etc., and how are you responding to those?
Oh, wow. That's a mouthful. I think, so I guess what I would say, maybe to take a little more of a global view to start, would be I had the opportunity on behalf of both the Premier and the Minister to go speak at OPEC in July. And that was the first, by the way, that we went and spoke there. And it was pretty interesting being in a room with a whole bunch of people who produce that much oil and resources and seeing the wealth that's generated in a lot of these countries where, of course, they're taking in 100% of the revenue of a barrel versus that. And I learned a lot from that experience from really from an exportation perspective or from our place in the world. They realized that Canada was a big player, but they really had no idea about how big we really are. We're typical, I think, in that sense, or we're not very good at telling our story, right? And so when I was explaining them our new reserves numbers, they were just totally blown away by that. Like, they had no idea we were now number 9 in the world in gas. Like that's a huge accomplishment or a huge reality of that we can work with now. So from the perspective of our position in the world, I said, do you know that we can actually start to trade some of our own oil and gas now? And, that is on a voluntary basis, something that we're looking to do. And there's real interest in the fact that Canada can be on the world stage relative to our oil and gas. We just have to make sure that we're going about doing it. And so, I think that the world is really sort of looking at it from a risk perspective. I think there's a couple things that we really need to be clear on. One is that I think, when we look at certain markets, there is a real movement towards, competitors, like, for example, in the LNG space, who have a much lower cost base than we do. And we have to be competitive on a global basis to make sure that those projects go ahead. So we really need to be, conscientious of what our costs are, what our structure is to ensure that we stay competitive. But we have tremendous advantages that people, I don't think, really fully understand. We have some of the cleanest gas in the world. It comes with a much lower overall both CO2 component as well as nitrogen, and so our gas starts cleaner, but we're not really great at selling it that way. So the reality of the world is there isn't a premium that's in the marketplace today paid for in regards to a barrel of oil or a molecule of gas. The world can't take that in yet, but it's moving that way. We just have to make sure that I think we continue to develop it the right way and support the ability for innovation, research, and science to make sure we're competitive on it.
I find it very interesting. I'm going to go off script just a little bit here. When you talk about our story, Alberta's story, and then we don't do a very good job of telling our story. Do you feel that has happened over time? Was there a time Alberta was known, whether it was the Lougheed era, the Klein era, those days when our story really was energy and gas and oil, and over time that's sort of diminished a little bit? Has there been a watering down of that story?
Well, I think that I would say that certainly during the evolution in regards to our conventional basin and in regards to the oil sands sector and the innovation that occurred with COSIA and other groups that helped us with the innovation, really that period of ramp up, really in the 80s and 90s, under the Lougheed era, where, we need to remember how important it was for Premier Lougheed to stand up for us constitutionally. Right? Section 92A of the Constitution is, if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be in a position where we're trading our own energy. We wouldn't be the owner, right? We wouldn't be in control of our destiny without that section of the Constitution. Yeah. So I look at that era and I go, I think Lougheed really set the table for us, to be honest with you. And then I think we provided the mechanisms by which with Ralph and beyond that, where we really carried on. But I think we've gotten away from understanding, hold on a sec, this is really our strength. And we really need to drive it relative to saying, let's be proud of what we're at. We're proud of the Jays. Let's be proud of our oil and gas. And let's make sure that we understand that, we can and should be using our gas, for example, on fuel switching in Asia. We talk about the growth of coal development in Asia, and the ability to switch from coal to gas is something that we can enable and lower global emissions. And that's something that we've already done. The other thing I would say, and I know Scott's here from Suncor, people need to realize since 2013, and S&P Global just came out with this study in the last couple of days. So since 2013, the intensity and emissions from our oil sands are down 28%. All right. That's a massive accomplishment. And that's as a result of using solvents, lowering our gas use, optimizing our gas, using different components in regards to extraction, and just working our entire supply chain to have a lower overall emissions construct. We don't trumpet that very much. We don't trumpet the fact that we came off coal for electricity 3 years early, right? We dropped our emissions in electricity for coal from 50 megatons down to 10, right? By coming off coal in our grid. We don't even talk about that. Like, we're world leaders in that from a power perspective. So it's these kinds of things that I think people need to realize and let industry do it. One of the reasons why our methane emissions, which we also exceeded 3 years ahead of the federal benchmark, by the way, in regards to 2014 levels, in regards to a methane target to reduce our methane by 50%. And we are looking at another target that is because industry went there. Industry made the investments and the innovation, the technology, and the support of the venting and flaring and the reductions of that so that we could bring our emissions down. We're world leaders in that, and we should be recognized for that. So
yeah, and you've touted a number of things that are happening, good things that are happening, but this is a bit of an all talk, no action question. So if we were, say, sitting here a year from now, what would you say would be tangible outcomes that you would want to say point as proof that Alberta's energy and minerals mandate aren't just being discussed, not all talk, what action is being taken a year from now, what's truly being delivered?
Oh, that's great. Well, obviously, I think we need a pipeline. Let's start there. So so just to put this into context for everyone, we committed, obviously, the Premier announced on October 1st, the fact that we are putting forward an advisory group that I co-chair with Alex Porbet, and the fact that we are putting an application forward to the Project Management Office for a 1 million barrel a day pipeline. We need that approved. But in order to prove that, of course, as part of the grand bargain, we also need to get pathways done in regards to carbon capture reduction. And we need the federal government to reduce and eliminate many of the bad policies that they've identified that are fundamental to the Premier and to our government and to our ability as an economy to thrive. So that kind of combination of that three-legged stool all has to be dealt with. And we're expecting it's dealt with in the next 6 months. Because if we don't get that, I think that we have a number of other issues that continue to be, let's just say, eroded our democracy that are on the fringe right now. And I think we know what we're talking about there. So,
yeah, pipeline. I mean, there is a lot of talk on pipeline, and it seems like not a lot of action. But I think behind the scenes, and Premier's doing a very good job, I think, of touting our province and who we are, and making sure that people know, and really a true proponent of pipeline, which is a necessity, given the volatile nature of commodity markets. And we know that from a very simple point of view by just driving by our gas stations every day and seeing the fluctuation in fuel. But given that, and climate policy, technology change, how is your ministry and the ministry building, I guess a good way to put it would be resiliency and flexibility into your planning while remaining faithful really to your long-term mandate and the Premier's desire in your mandate letter?
Yeah, so what we're looking at doing, I think what we're seeing in regards to the pressure on affordability, profits, markets, what have you, our real direction is to move you might say, move away from short-term federal policy constructs, in particular on emissions, to move that spectrum further out into a 2050 construct and say, look, we can reduce our emissions. Let's not try to hit a 2030 number that's going to cost us a whole bunch of things. So from a resiliency perspective, we need to understand really the fragility of our economy right now. If you look at what's happening in central Canada, you see Stellantis, you see all kinds of things where, let's be honest, our competitiveness and our productivity are under fire. For goodness sake, let's not take that pole and put it on top of the golden goose of energy. Let's be realistic, let's be practical, and let's push some of these things out to 2040, 2050, and ensure that we can let innovation, technology catch up to that. Good example. When we look at carbon capture today on a large scale in regards to what we're looking at, whether it's pathways or others, the technology isn't really quite there. So it's, the amine technology in carbon capture hasn't really been proven at a large scale. There is some new technology actually being developed at the University of Calgary that looks quite interesting in regards to being able to scale. But we need to be able to ensure that we can be practical and logical about what do we need to do in regards to ensuring our economy can be healthy, successful going forward. And from a resiliency perspective, basically reduce our permitting, reduce the barrier and red tape. I think our government's done a pretty good job in red tape reduction, but we need to continue to be vigilant in that to ensure that capital does come back in and that we continue to see capital come in for a pipeline like we're going to want. Our role isn't to take that pipeline on and own it. We want to get it to the starting gate. That's the Premier's direction, at which point we are expecting that the conditions will be there to support the ability for capital to come back in and take that pipeline and finish it. But we have to ensure that we've got the competitive framework to ensure that capital will come back into the province and the country in a big way. And that's what we should be focused on.
So you're not an elected official, so
No.
you can answer this truthfully.
Yeah, try to.
The tension, provincial federal tension. When we talk pipelines, there's this provincial federal tension, not just pipelines, but energy as a whole, Alberta's place within Canada as a whole. Where does that sit right now? What are you guys feeling in your ministry? Where is that at?
Well, we are engaged in a negotiation. I think most people are aware of that with the federal government right now. And there are officials on both sides that are meeting. I guess what I would say, I'm very optimistic. I think that we are seeing changes in regards to our relationship that we have not seen in a long time. And the fact that we can now have a discussion about enhanced oil recovery. And we're actually having those discussions right now on how we have an enhanced oil recovery potentially become part of the investment tax credit scheme, whereby we would be able to actually use our CO2, obviously on a downhole basis, to then extract more oil and get a credit for that back from a federal government. That's a big change, right? That's a big change for them to think about that. We're also looking at, when it comes to gas and where we're at on methane emissions, for example, we're in discussions to sort of say, how do we make that next tier objective far more practical? We understand that industry wants to make sure that they're doing investments to reduce our methane, Cam, but I think that we also need to make sure that it's not done in such a short period of time. So we're into these discussions right now. I'm optimistic, but I would also ironically, quote Reagan in saying we need to trust but verify. We've been down this road before. I think it's fair to say, and we've been, it hasn't worked out all that well. So we're optimistic. We're moving forward. We're having very good discussions, and I think that some of those 9 laws and some of the things that, Frankie, you're maybe going to see in the budget, I think there's things that may surprise some of us that are coming in the budget on Monday that are going to be quite positive. And I think it's showing that the direction from the federal government is that they need to have an economy and a stronger economy relative to some of the ideology that potentially from a policy perspective got in the way before. So we're seeing this change. And I think as a strong entrepreneurial province where the backbone of this province is in regards to jobs, entrepreneurialism, and building a business, we're seeing some good signals, but we now need to see the proof is going to have to be in the pudding. So that's what we're hoping for.
So Ottawa is recognizing Alberta as you're feeling optimistic that because that's the tension all the time, that we feel disrespected. We feel, especially on an energy front, but you're feeling more positive about that.
Yeah, I am. And I think that, and I really feel, I will just sort of tell a little side story. My wife is from Ontario, and she is tied in with the Italian side of the Ontario mafia, and her family, of course, all comes from construction, right? Everybody right? It's kind of goes hand in hand. So, we were out there just the last couple of weeks, and some of her brothers were telling me that they can't get work right now in Ontario for construction, and I'm going, excuse me, you guys have been able to find ways of getting work, right? For decades. And you're telling me you don't have work right now? Folks, that's a problem. If at the grassroots level of these small to medium-sized businesses, folks aren't getting jobs in central Canada, it's not if the recession's coming, it's when. And so we need to be very mindful of that because, let's be honest, what we see happening in central Canada right now is the slow, in my view, breakdown of the entire auto sector moving to the United States. Call it what it is. That is going to have an impact. And, if you start to look at the legs on the stool of the Canadian economy, what we've got here is going to become more and more important every day. And we are trying to make sure, one of the things in my mandate, and I'll stop after saying this, is that, my mandate letter from the Premier is, Larry, we want, you don't just deal with egress here in Alberta. I don't want you just dealing with egress here in Alberta. I want you dealing with egress opportunities, pipeline opportunities in every province. I'm working with 5 provinces right now to build additional egress. We're working directly with Tim Houston, of course, who is, if you're aware of what's gone on in Nova Scotia, he has just made himself the energy minister. We have a premier who just made himself energy minister in Nova Scotia. And we're working directly with his government on both drilling capability as well as a royalty framework for them to develop gas. He's taken the fracking ban off, and Nova Scotia is drilling gas. And they're going back into it and saying, we're doing this. All right, let's think about that. That hasn't, that we're working with Quebec right now on a pipeline. We're working with Ontario. Ontario today released, by the way, if you hadn't seen it, Ontario announced today that they have just selected someone to help them with their entire egress opportunity and the build out of their entire structure. We co-wrote that with them. My department co-wrote that with them. We're working directly with the government of Ontario to help build egress that could include James Bay. Certainly, we need to look at some components in regards to how we support our national security in regards to Line 5, Line 8, Line 9, right? But we also need to look at additional storage, and we need to look at a strategic petroleum reserve construct for Ontario. I'm sure it's not lost on people that if Line 5 went down, or maybe that changed, and we kind of have to remind Premier Ford of this sometimes, that if Line 5 goes down, and I think, Tom, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if Massachusetts said we're not going to allow any more oil, Ontario's economy shuts down in days, hours probably. Like, I think someone said to me, Tom, you might know the numbers, but I think someone said that if that happened, Pearson runs out of jet fuel in about 72 hours. So look, we need to look at this. We're working with Manitoba, with Wab Canoe on Churchill, right? And there's some great constructs there. We need to look at all forms of egress to support it. And so we're engaged on all of them. Yep.
Well, it's evident that Ontario is feeling the pinch a little bit. Blue Jay games, if you've been watching, their Ring of Fire commercial is played about 3 or 4 times during the Jays game, right next to the Home Hardware commercial, which I can't stand. But anyway, no offense if you're from Home Hardware, but that drives me nuts. But their Ring of Fire commercial I find quite interesting, their promotion in Ontario. But we'll move on. So in your view, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years, what would, speaking of the Jays, what would constitute a really big win for your Ministry of Energy and Minerals under the current mandate that you have? What would be a big win for us?
Well, I think a big win, if you just take the time frame going forward from where we are now. So a big win is, so by May of next year, we have a Class 5 estimate. And by the way, the pipeline concept that we're working on, and I will thank Enbridge as well as South Bow and Trans Mountain, and I'm not sure who all is here, but you need to remember, we're not just doing this ourselves. We've got a working group of people who have over 250 years of experience building pipelines that are actively daily working on this application with us. So we've got TMX, we've got Enbridge folks, and we've got folks from South Bow, which is now the oil arm, of course, for TransCanada that TransCanada spun off. They're working day to day on this. So if you cast that forward, the Class 5 goes in by May, and we're expecting with Dawn Farrell and her team that we would have that approved, let's just say maybe within 6 to 12 months after that. Dawn is in front of the Senate here 2 weeks ago. She said 4 months, and I went, wow, okay, we'll see if that plays out. I'd love that. But let's just say it takes a year. They have up to 2 years, but let's say that takes a year. We could be in a situation where we're basically putting pipe in the ground within 24 to 36 months. That would be really an achievement. And then I think from there, we have, not to sort of go past this, but we have a tremendous amount of work to do between then and now with Indigenous participation and engagement. That is going to be fundamental to this. And we have a tremendous amount of work, I think, to do with the producer group in the Pathways group and with producers generally, because there's a dramatic pull of oil to the south right now. There's lots of egress going south, and we could see another 1 million barrels of egress going to the United States in the next 4 to 5 years, 6 years. It's kind of teed up. So if you add another 1 million on top of that, now we're talking about a profound amount of capital that would come back into this province. And I think with that, as we all know, because you guys have all been through this as have I, and that's why guys like LaForge and I have got no hair, is that, it's about the labor. It's about how do you sequence this? How do you ensure you've got the capital built up to go do a $100 billion investment in the oil sands? That's a lot of capital. And so we really have to think that through. We need to think about how we stage that, how we incent that, and ensure that producers can come along with us, given the pressure they have on them now to basically return a lot of their cash flow to their shareholders. That's going to be an interesting component.
So from your vantage point, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Be a big win.
Yeah, it'd be a huge win.
Be a Blue Jay win.
It would be like deja vu all over again.
Yeah,
right? It would be
great.
But we have to remember, and the oil sands guys will correct me very quickly, say, yeah, but Larry, just remember the problems we ran into with labor, with those kinds of things in 2014, 13 to 15. How do we make sure that the Norquests and the Sates and the Nates and that we've got that we've got that trades group built up where we can ensure that we can catch a lot of that and have that set up properly.
And that segues sort of right into this next question, that from your vantage point, what would you see as some key barriers, regulatory, financial, workforce, supply chain, that you're seeing in the ministry in meeting the government's mandate on emerging energy technologies? What are some of those key barriers for you?
Well, I think first let's go high to low, I guess. Let's get the 9 things addressed that the Premier's outlined. Let's get that done, right? Let's get the emissions cap done. Let's get the tanker ban done. Let's get a clear understanding and let's get the greenwashing so that maybe we can actually start to put things back into our websites that can tell people that there's a good story we're actually doing on emissions and not feel like you're going to go to court over that, or jail over that, I should say. But let's get those 9 things addressed. Then I think really at that stage we have to think about how are we dealing with our permitting and the ability to ensure that we can support both conventional and heavy oil relative to and gas and other things relative to permitting, and squeeze our permitting time frame dramatically. One of the other things in my mandate is to have it that we have a permitting construct where things are actually approved in 120 days. So I have a team of people now that's led by energy that includes the Alberta Energy Regulator, as well as environment and protected areas. And they are working to assess every policy and every permitting construct to see what it's going to take to get it to where things can be approved in 120 days. And so that's the next thing we need to do. And then I think the other thing from an innovation and an education technology, I think we're going to need to sit down with the trade schools. I think we're going to need to sit down with industry, and we're going to need to say, okay, how do we want to tackle this together? Because I think it is something that we have to get the best ideas we can come out to realize, okay, is what kind of programs are we going to need? How do we go to support that and start to build that now? Yes, the pipeline won't be built and probably moving oil until say 2032. But the reality is, there's no better time to start in regards to those pieces than right now. Yeah,
Absolutely. Chris Martin from Edmonton Chamber of Commerce submitted this question. Given that much of Alberta's crude oil and other non-renewable energy products are currently exported into the U.S. for refining before being re-imported for domestic use, what plans does the province have and your ministry have to attract investment and businesses that would probably enable greater value-added processing and refining capacity within Alberta itself?
Yeah, well, I think, I think if you look at the industrial heartland, there are a number of things there that I would say, we have to look at the refining construct and say there's certain things that we can do that are truly value add that we're looking at there. So if you look at some of the big projects there that we're doing, I think there's a construct there that is sort of the next evolution relative to refining inside the province. So, let's take the Dow net zero pathways or net zero path to net zero project. They're basically, although slowed down a little bit because of some of the challenges that are going on globally as far as petrochemical in particular, that's a $16 billion project that basically is going to provide plastic feedstock around the world. And so, yeah, it's not, we're not producing the plastic because quite frankly, we just don't have enough of an industrial base here to do that, right? It's not economic, but we have taken it from a feedstock construct with cheap gas and with the inputs, with the support of Linde, for example, in regards to the hydrogen side, and they're going to be producing petrochemical feedstock for plastic to the world that'll go off and export off of Prince Rupert, for example, and other mains. So we're value add. We're looking at those kinds of things. Keyera's just made some announcements. We've got the biodiesel plant that Imperial Oil's done. Like, the industrial heartland is doing a tremendous amount of things right now to build out, I would say, that next level of sort of evolution in our ability to have refining capacity here. And the industrial heartland is also, by the way, an area where we're thinking we are going to have a tremendous focus for critical minerals processing. You're going to hear all about some programs that we're about to be announced probably by January on our critical mineral strategy that will go to support the development of utilizing both the power, the rail, and really the entire makeup of the industrial heartland to support critical minerals processing here in Alberta. When you think about the fact that just to the north of us, the Northwest Territories has 21 of the 25 most critical minerals in the world. What you're seeing from the United States, by the way, right now is direct investments right into these companies. So they just acquired 10% of the stock in a Vancouver company. They've also, the U.S. military has made a direct investment into Fortune Minerals, which is just in the Northwest Territories. That processing can come to Alberta, and we can process that and support that as part of a development relative to a whole new realm of refining that we don't have today.
Define critical minerals for us.
Critical minerals are basically critical minerals. There's essentially 25, 28, depending on how you define them, critical minerals globally that go to basically support about 80 to 90% of all of the manufactured goods in the world, from magnets to cobalt to copper to lithium, obviously and we are fortunate here in Alberta. We've got probably 8 or 9 that are very, in very good supply. We'll probably be we'd probably be number 3 or 4 in the world on lithium, for example, in regards to our resource, and we haven't even started to extract it. We've got great companies like E3 and others that are doing some great work, and just, by the way, E3 just went through a private placement. They raised about $12 million to start their first pilot project to get themselves up and going, to get to where they're producing, you might say, larger volumes of lithium. And so that element's going to come to us, and it's just starting to build, right? And obviously we understand the importance of that. The issue, of course, being that we have China as being obviously, as you all know, I'm sure, that they are the world's largest both producer and processor of critical minerals. So what they will do very cleverly, of course, is that when the demand starts to grow and the price grows up, they will flood the market and bring the price back down. So we can't develop. And so the federal government, I'll give the federal government some credit here. I know Michelle's here. Like the federal government is actually working right now within the G7 to create a buying group among the G7 countries that will create a stable market for critical minerals on a go-forward basis, which is extremely important if we want to have long-term certainty for companies to make investments in critical minerals, for them to basically say, well, they're not going to get going, and of course the price drops and they basically are in big trouble.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. If you were like me last night, flipping between the Jays game and Trump meeting Xi in Seoul, out of the 90 minutes they discussed, critical minerals was one of the key topics that was brought up apparently, and they discussed all of that and magnets and those kinds of things. I found that very interesting, actually, that was a very critical point in their negotiations yesterday. So
critical.
Yeah, it was incredible. Isabella Roth from Infinity Healthcare submitted a question. It's a good question. It says, as Alberta leads in energy innovation, how is the ministry ensuring that the transition to cleaner energy resources doesn't leave behind sectors or communities that depend on traditional energy? How do we build a resilient, diversified economy that supports both innovation and stability for families and small businesses across our province? That tension in there between innovation and
well, I think you do it by having a ministry called Affordability and Utilities. Let's start right there, because I think we really have to keep that in mind as far as the affordability piece. I think we really. I'm worried about the pressure on families today. Like I am very worried about that on a broader level as far as affordability. And so I think we want all forms of energy, and I think we know that in certain cases that's probably not a bad way to go. But we really need to be conscientious of, if we're going to make policy change, not to impose or increase the cost of living on folks. We have to really, really be conscious of that. And so it's the reason why, for example, our government has so vehemently pushed back against the clean electricity regulations. And so when you've got a policy like that, where essentially they would like us to include carbon capture in our grid at an incremental cost to our grid, so that you as consumers all have to then, basically bear that cost in a time when, let's be honest, things like we've seen what's happened coming out of COVID, we've seen the inflation spike, we've seen all these kinds of things occur. I think we really have to be conscientious about how we go about doing those things. And it's got to be practical and it's got to be achievable. And so when it comes to something like the clean fuel regs, we are conscientiously pushing back on that, because from our perspective, we see what's happening in our grid, and we want to make sure that we can help support the advent of data centers and the ability to expand our grid. But the dollars to go do that are substantial. And if you're adding an incremental cost of that. So from a technology innovation perspective, I'm a believer in saying, look, the innovation in technology in regards to its ability has to help support our ability to drop costs. That's ultimately where we should be going. And let's let industry go do that. But whatever we do as governments, let's make sure we're not imposing additional costs into the system, because that just really erodes your entire economic fabric as a country and as a province. And I think that's the nice thing I think we're seeing in a way out of Ottawa, is this kind of move from what I would kind of call sort of a public policy ideology to something that's more practical. Now, we still need to see it, and it's got to show up, but they're moving the right direction, would be my view.
Little group participation question here. How many feel government moves too slow?
Oh, yeah.
All in favor, say aye. Carried. All right.
Yeah.
That being said, Deputy Minister,
yeah,
the public often feels that government moves very slowly. How do you balance the need for careful policy design and consultation with urgency, the urgency industry feels to see tangible results?
Well, I think the public policy piece is one in which we feel it's pretty important to make sure that we go out there and talk to industry and ensure that we're going through the process. I think what we're trying to ensure that we do is move with pace. I think there's a new realm of pace. Certainly in my ministry, I can say that we're pretty active in making sure, Cam, we're moving pretty quickly here. But I think that, my sense would be that we need to find ways of ensuring that we enable things like AI to support our ability. Like, one of the things we're spending a lot of time in the government on right now is how do we streamline our process? How do we streamline our policy development process with things like artificial intelligence? And how is that actually going to be something that is meaningfully injected in the right way into the ability for us to develop policies? So our technology innovation group is really working on things with us. And I think governments around the world are realizing that they need to move way faster. Let's be honest. And I know that this is something that's front and center. Dale McPhee, who is in charge of exec council for us, as you would know, came from the city of Edmonton here from the police department, is now in charge of exec council. And Dale is a huge advocate for us wanting to use technology and streamline. So we are looking at streamlining certain things, certainly in my policy area, and there's changes coming there. But the key is we have to go faster relative to using technology as an enabler, in my view, and ensure that we are still engaging with industry, but that we make those decisions and turn that around as quickly as we possibly can.
Last question, most important question of the entire event. The score tomorrow night.
Score tomorrow night. Blue Jays 6, Dodgers 2.
There you go. You heard it here, folks.
There you go.
Yeah, we're taking home the
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now we will bring Quinn with Alberta Council up to do the official thank you. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Quinn. And the gifts are down here. This is ministers and this is camps.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Quinn Heffron. I'm the lead of the energy practice at Alberta Council here in Edmonton. We are very proud to be a gold sponsor of today's event and to work alongside many of you in Alberta's energy sector. At Alberta Council, we support clients across the province with government relations, regulatory strategy, and Indigenous relations, helping all of you energy leaders navigate complex policy landscapes that we've discussed today and advance the projects that power our province. On behalf of Alberta Council, I want to extend a sincere thank you to Deputy Minister Larry Kaumeyer. Thank you for coming today, for sharing your time and insights, and to the Alberta Enterprise Group for organizing another outstanding event that keeps the dialogue on Alberta's energy future moving forward. Thank you all for being here and for your continued commitment to Alberta's energy leadership. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Quinn. Appreciate you. Mr. Liston, our chair, has a few words. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Catherine. We won't keep you long. Larry, thank you. That was excellent. And I love what you've done with your hair. Between you and Pat and I, Mom, she just loves us. Don't we look like brothers? My name is John Liston. I'm involved with the Alberta Enterprise Group. We have a chair that I've taken, and there's a group of us, including Bruno Muller right up front here, was one of the founders. This group was started in 2007. Cal Nichols was kind of the driving force behind it. Tim Shipton, who's now an executive vice president with the Euler Group, was our president. And we've
We've stayed involved because business has to have a voice. And sometimes individual business can't say what they need to say. We can say it as an organization. And that's kind of our goal, is advocating on behalf of business in the province of Alberta. And if we need to, we can go further than Alberta. But ultimately, we advocate, we create trade missions. But Alberta only happens when we have this partnership between business and government. And that, that Mr. Kaumeyer would take the time today, and that wasn't just 15-minute prepared speech. That's a lot of time and energy, so thank you. We used to have a young lady running our group called Danielle Smith. And Danielle Smith left here and went into politics and is now wandering around Dubai doing some deals for you. So to answer your question, Cam, on what does he do? Well, he gets up at about 3 in the morning and he goes to bed about 2 in the morning. And Danielle calls at each of those times saying, can you just get me? How am I doing, Larry? So I'll tell you what the deputy ministers do. They do the work, and it's just vital. And we press you all the time for, you need to be faster, you need to be better. We don't need any more regulations, but we need you to regulate. Just demands on the government are significant. But as business people, we need to make things work. So that's what this group is about. And, there's a couple of things that were mentioned today. The tanker ban, Bill C-69, which is called the Impact Assessment Act. We ended up being an intervener in the case that went to the provincial appeals court and then went to the Supreme Court. Sorry, I was losing the words. So we played a significant role in that. Well, we need money to be able to do that because these lawyers keep charging us. And so as a group, we need as many of the businesses in Alberta to join us so that we can afford to do some of these battles on, the Bill C-69 or the tanker ban or, all of the different bills that we're getting challenged on. And so my appeal to you is, if you're a member, thank you for playing a part in us continuing to advocate for business. If you're not a member, give it some thought. It's $25,000 a year for our industry partners. It's $4,000 a year for our specific companies. And we need help. We need everybody involved so that many hands make light work. So thank you for being here. Thanks for supporting Alberta Enterprise Group. And again, Larry, thanks for taking your time. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you, John. Thoughtful remarks. There's cookies in the back of the room, so when you're leaving, grab some, please. We've got 2 upcoming events that I would like to announce. December 8th, we've got Parliamentary Secretary Dijon, who's going to be speaking about the Nuclear Energy Panel, Calgary Petroleum Club. December 17th, we've got our Premier Smith holiday reception featuring a private AAG member-only session, followed by Premier's holiday address and a party. So hopefully you guys will be able to join. We have a business card draw now for a free membership. Curtis Beets, Public Affairs Analyst with Tourmaline. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.